Hi, I'm Jeff, lead pastor of Northview Community Church in Abbotsford, British Columbia. And this podcast is where I get a chance to interview people about things that I'm interested in and talk about whatever I want to talk about.
Hello, I'm Levi, the producer, and I wanted to give you an update regarding the course that this podcast is going to be taking over the coming weeks. As you likely know, hopefully this isn't the first time you're hearing about this, Jeff is heading to pastor a church in Chicago starting at the beginning of July, and thus, that is when our podcast will be coming to an end. We still have a few more episodes to record and release to you. Some are with familiar voices, and some will be altogether new for you. So that being said, stay tuned for those as they keep coming out weekly. For today, Jeff recorded a conversation with his friend Matt Jones, who is the pastor of Del Rey Church in Playa del Rey, California. They talk about Matt's experience and studies in the area of the racial history of evangelicalism in Los Angeles in particular. It's a really interesting conversation, so we think it'll be really good for you to listen to.
Well, I'm here with the esteemed Dr. Matt Jones. Matt, have you ever heard the song Mr. Jones? Is it by Counting Crows? Something like that? 1990. You're a kid of the 90s, aren't you?
A little older, and I don't do rock.
Whatever, Matt. You love rock. You love it.
Me and Mrs. Jones got a thing going on. Know that one.
So Matt Jones is here. He is the pastor of Del Rey Bible Church in Marina del Rey. Is it Marina del Rey? Playa del Rey. Playa del Rey, California. If you fly into LAX, you go right over it. And it's beautiful and amazing. And he's got this great church that is phenomenal, both because of its bold proclamation and its multicultural vibe. And it's one of my favorite churches in the whole world. I've preached there once or twice. And always want to go back, but Matt never invites me back because I must have said something to make him mad.
No.
Matt and I studied together at Talbot School of Theology, did our doctorates there, and he's doing another doctorate now, a real one that counts, PhD. And Matt, what is the title of your dissertation you're writing now?
Oh, that's a good one. It's gone through various iterations, but the current title of my dissertation is Reckoning with White Flight and Faith, an Ethno-Theological Case Study of Racial History and Evangelical Memory in Post-War Los Angeles. It's a mouthful.
It is, but you have been spending an enormous amount of time in the last number of years, and probably a lot of your life, interacting with some of the racial dynamics in LA. Which has gotten you involved in thinking about a lot of the racial dynamics in the States. And so I always love talking to you about this kind of stuff. This is going to be good fun. Hey, can you just let the people who we're talking to know who you are, where you came from? Why you don't invite me to preach more?
You are welcome to preach anytime, and let it be heard on this recording here. I've always said that in the event of my untimely death, I've already told my wife that Jeff Bucknam is giving the message that day, because I trust that it will be biblical and gospel-centered and challenging. You are actually one of my favorite preachers to listen to. So
I feel buttered up now, Matt. Thank you.
Man crushing. I'm a child of the 70s. I was born in Southern California. I was raised in Inglewood, California, where I currently live. And I was the son of a pastor. My parents were, we'll put a name on it. My parents were married by Chuck Swindoll.
What?
And they went back into the evangelical free church movement in Southern California and the big boom around Chuck Swindoll. My dad graduated from Biola College and went on to Talbot Seminary. My mom, also attended Biola. And they were just, a young, dynamic couple who wanted to serve the Lord. And they took a church in Inglewood in the 70s. at a time when white flight was creating a lot of shifts in Southern California, in particular in Los Angeles, and urban centers really around the United States. And in the midst of that pastorate, their marriage began to unravel. I was a little boy. It was a Sunday morning before church on a Sunday. We lived in a parsonage that the house was just on top of the sanctuary. And it was a Sunday morning when my parents sat my brother and I down and said, we're getting a divorce and we're going to let the church know this morning. And we walked down to service that day, and our whole lives really just unraveled. So as a young boy, I went from this living literally in a church in inner city Los Angeles in Inglewood, which at the time was predominantly African American. And there was this once thriving, small, dying white congregation that my dad was pastoring. And I didn't have the categories to talk about it at the time. This has sort of taken shape throughout, the course of my life in ministry and academic stuff. And so that's a reason why I'm doing a lot of the research. I'm just kind of making sense out of my own lived experience. So, yeah, that was the 70s, 80s. My parents got divorced. My dad, there's not much you can do with an MDiv in a conservative evangelical tradition when you've had a divorce, a messy divorce. So he went to police academy and became a cop. So as a little boy, my dad transitioned from pastor to cop. Single parent dad. He took my brother and I, and we'd visit our mom on occasion, and she ended up leaving the city and the state altogether. And so it was a weird upbringing. I was the only white male in my junior high class, so I was raised in a context where I was, the minority, if you will. But the one place of sort of white culture was church on Sunday. So the rest of my life, where I lived, where I went to school, was very black and brown, but church on Sunday was always white. And I resented the church after the divorce. And, as a kid, you're trying to process your parents getting divorced, but it's complicated when you're a pastor's kid because, I lost my bedroom. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like other kids' parents get divorced, whatever. So we lost our church, our bedroom. I was a bit confused, to state it succinctly. And it would be later in life that a friend at work was witnessing to me and began to challenge my life with regard to the gospel. And honestly, he was kind of badgering me in ways. He kept bringing it up. And I told him, man, I believe in Jesus. I used to be a pastor's kid. Come on, and he challenged me. This guy, Patrick Short, God bless his name forever. He said, well, if you believe in Jesus, why are you living your life the way you're living it? I was just doing the LA thing and bouncing around and getting involved in all types of rebellion. And through Pat's witness in my life, I ended up really repenting of sin and coming to the Lord and getting plugged into a church where I was discipled really for the first time, though raised by a used-to-be pastor turned cop dad who told me about Jesus. It really took shape there as a 19-year-old. And I ended up wanting to learn more about the Bible than what the church could give me. And I ended up enrolling in Bible college at Biola, of all places. So all of the things that I didn't want to do, having watched my parents went to Biola and their whole lives fall apart, and thought, what am I doing at Biola, of all places? So I ended up doing some Bible degrees, doing grad school, seminary, and, we met each other working on doctorates at Talbot. And I had a lot of just kind of stuff I wanted to explore more, which led to the PhD, kind of trying to make sense out of, white evangelicalism, theology, racism.
Well, you did your DMin stuff in slavery as well, right? Doctor of Ministry stuff. You wrote a dissertation on that.
Yeah, and that was another thing. Biola it's a predominantly white space, and so in the course of studying there, it was really disconnected from my life in the city and my ministry context. So, for example, there was an ethics class that I took. I'll never forget this. In my MA program, we took an ethics class, and won't say names or anything, but the professor of the class wrote a textbook that a lot of evangelical institutions use. And so, in the course of studying ethics, we're looking at, sexuality, we're looking at, gambling, cohabitation. We even got a lecture on cohabitation. And at the end of it, I sat with the professor and I said, we had a whole ethics class here. We didn't talk about racism. Like, why didn't we talk about racism? He's like, well, everyone knows that's wrong. I'm like, do they? And I'm like, we didn't talk about slavery, and the professor's like, well, that was a long time ago. And I go, no, like human trafficking is bigger than slavery's ever been before. Like slavery is huge. What are you talking about? Incidentally, in the updated version of that textbook, they've now addressed it, but it's still sort of a timestamp to think like there's generations of evangelical leaders that take ethics class, right, to prepare them for ministry, and they've never reflected on, the conditions that people are facing in urban centers all around the world. To boot, Los Angeles, like Biola is the Bible Institute of Los Angeles. You're the training institution for Los Angeles, and you're not talking about racism and slavery and urban issues that impact those who will be ministering in these contexts. So for the Doctor of Ministry program, I got really interested in like, what would it look like to do a project, a dissertation addressing, slavery and abolitionism and contemporary human trafficking. So I've just been kind of trying to do my part to plug in some of the holes that I see in evangelicalism, particularly white evangelicalism, because I'm in a weird place where I'm white ethnically, but I wasn't raised in white culture, so I don't totally identify with it. But I look really white, so I'm sort of studying issues and bringing awareness to things that I think others within white evangelicalism might not think about, or perhaps when people of color bring it up, they might be marginalized as the angry black man who's bringing up slavery, that was so long ago, get over it already. But here's a white guy who's really interested in studying it. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm up to, and I'm a pastor at heart, so all that is just on the side. And in terms of pastoral ministry, in the course of this research project and my own story, I discovered, I don't know if I told you this before, but we had our 50th anniversary. Our church is 60 plus years old now, but like some 10 years ago, I've been pastoring there like 20 something years now, but on our 50th anniversary, I hunted down the pastor who planted the church.
Wow.
And I'm like, hey, we're having a 50th. We're going to make some t-shirts. We're going to have a party. Well, we made some coffee mugs, 1959 on them, celebrating, the church. And I would love to have you come preach on a Sunday. I'd love to, let's celebrate this. Let's talk about this, tell the story, And as I was talking to him, it's like, hey, how did the church get started? It was like, oh, we came out of downtown Los Angeles. And I have in my mind 1959, I know sort of the data points of the church. And I go, well, the 50s, like that's the white flight era, I'm thinking. And I go, why did you guys plant the church? And he goes, well, people are moving and it just seemed like a good time. And the west side of Los Angeles, like the beach was just wide open real estate, and you're able to buy cheap land, and people are moving, and so it just made sense to go there and plant a church or whatever. And well, like, what happened to the church, the downtown church? And I started asking questions, long story short, and then he goes, well, I mean, we had to get out of there. I'm like, what do you mean, And he's like, well, those people started moving in.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where, having white skin, I guess, serves a utility there. And he's telling me, like I would agree with him, that basically we had to get out of there because minorities were coming in, and it just wasn't, it wasn't safe anymore. They're bringing in their rap music and their gangs and all these crazy stereotypes. So anyway, as I'm talking to him, I'm put in this weird place because on the one hand, I want to celebrate this church that's been in West LA for 50 years. On the other hand, I'm realizing, oh shoot, our story, our ecclesial biography includes sort of this racialized terrain. And of course, this already, the country has a racialized history, a past to reckon with. But I'm sort of processing that as a guy who's taken over a church that has this racialized past. So I start hunting down old members of the church and just finding their stories and why they left, where they left. And and I start hearing stories of white flight. And I thought to myself, I want to examine the theology that undergirds why white people thought to themselves, we got to get out of here. Well, there's we're sending missionaries around the world who will die for the gospel, but we've got these Southern California congregations that are following the white flight pattern and planting churches just based around white flight. And then you watch the downtown urban center, you watch these churches die and close down. And in fact, in the process, you start noticing whole institutions like, our alma mater, Biola. Biola used to be in the downtown. Biola left the downtown in 1959, the same year that my church was planted. And there were other Christian colleges in the downtown. Chapman was a Christian college that left the downtown. Pepperdine was a Christian college that left the downtown and went to
Malibu now,
Malibu,
right?
Whitetopia. McClay School of Theology that later became Claremont left the downtown. Life Pacific University left the downtown. What is now known as the Masters College or Masters University was also in the downtown. At the time, it was the Los Angeles Baptist Theological Seminary.
Matt, why? So you're studying this stuff now. Is it possible for you to give like a synopsis of why? I mean, I'm listening to all that. I'm interested both in why it happened then and whether you think those kinds of forces are still at play.
Yeah, I think those forces are still at play, but they are less overtly racialized. So, sort of the pastor I was talking about would say, well, they moved in and those people, and he would be candid about certain racialized ideologies, In particular, this pastor said, at first it was kind of interesting when they started to come to church, but then we started to worry about whether or not our children would marry one another. And we knew that wasn't okay. So you start seeing sort of theologies of like Curse of Cain and, weird hermeneutical gymnastics using.
What's the Curse of Cain? For people who don't know, what is that?
The Curse of Cain is it's a white supremacist reading of Torah that understands Cain being cursed by God, the curse being specifically black skin. And so Cain is marked by God with black skin, and this becomes, if you Google Curse of Cain, you'll see like there's all sorts of folks who held to Curse of Cain theology that extends quite back. In fact, you'll find Curse of Cain theology going into kind of Biola history in some of the early professors and pastors that were tied to Biola.
Yeah, so this sort of stuff wasn't like way off there in people who, evangelicals would say, well, it was evangelicals who held a lot of this stuff.
Yeah, it gets a little murky though, because it depends to evangelicalism as like a socio ecclesial group is kind of hard to define. I think a lot of it is more fundamentalist than it is 20th century evangelicalism, but because fundamentalism and evangelicalism cross-pollinate, they cross over quite a bit. So if I had to point the finger at something, I think it thrived more in fundamentalism and then found its way into evangelicalism. And then, kind of neo-evangelical movements started seeing some of this and wanting to address it. However, they weren't aggressive in doing it, so that, evangelicalism as we know it in the current moment still has ties to it. And even,
does it, Matt? Does it? Like you're talking about 1959, and I can hear myself and others thinking, yeah, but that's, that was for the civil rights movement and that kind of stuff. What about now?
Yeah, I mean, we have historical ties to it. So these are our institutions that trained our leaders that, are the ones who are, still, leading in the movement and raising up the generation. So I don't think it's far-fetched to believe that there's some kind of residual that, that shapes these sorts of things. I just don't think it's not overt in the way that it once was. It's not legal anymore, for example. Where institutions in days of old, like, Bob Jones did not admit African Americans, and literally fought the IRS, to maintain its white supremacy, and had on the books no interracial dating clause into 2000,
No.
Into the 2000s. So you go like,
No.
like this is insane when you look at this history. And something like that, like Bob Jones is an institution, without naming any names here, but a lot of our evangelical leaders that we currently revere were trained at Bob Jones as an institution. So and Biola had a relationship with Bob Jones. So I mean, you think about this, 1969, so let's move past 59 to 1969. There was a group of black families that brought a class action suit to enjoin the Secretary of the Treasury and the Commissioner of the IRS to revoke tax-exempt status of white private schools, so-called segregation academies. And so, like, this goes all the way up. 1971 is Green versus Connolly, resulting in the Supreme Court decision that all tax-exempt private schools had to desegregate. So Bob Jones in the post Green versus Connolly 1971 it is still like throwing down with segregation type stuff. I mean, Bob Jones, gave an honorary doctorate to one of the leading white supremacists at the time, George Wallace, and James Strom Thurmond. So in 1970, the IRS starts going after Bob Jones's exemption status. And in order to skirt the IRS in 71, Bob Jones admitted one part-time black student. This is 17 years after Brown versus Board of Education.
Wow.
So they admitted one part-time black student who dropped out a month later. And then in the mid-70s, the IRS just continues pressuring Bob Jones, particularly around another U.S. Supreme Court case, Runyon versus McCrary it was, in which racial discrimination in private schools was again confirmed to be unconstitutional. So 1974...
But they just kept digging in. Like, that's the point.
Digging in. So 1974, BJU formally removed their whites-only policy, and they admitted a few black students again to try and skirt it, but the only black students that they admitted were married ones because they had on their handbooks no interracial dating.
Yeah, all the way to the 2000s. So, but okay, Matt, but Bob Jones is Bob Jones, right? That's totally different than other things, than other churches. So isn't it too much to say that, evangelical or churches or Christians struggle with racism these days? Isn't that going too far? I'm asking that as a softball, brother. I'm just.
Yeah, I mean, you've got you got Bob Jones officially apologizing for this racial history in the 2000s. I mean, so when people do the, it wasn't that long ago kind of thing, it's like, yeah, but you guys just apologized for this in the 21st century. And so there's a residual effect from that when you have these institutions that have this racialized past and haven't been proactive in terms of how do we reckon with our history? I mean, I went to Biola, and Biola did not admit black students at its founding in the 1800s. They discriminated against black students. They had a no black student policy. I've combed through the archives and found in the publications of the institution just racialized rhetoric, and you go, oh, this is that's a part of the DNA. And
so how is that DNA played out now in the present moment? I think this is what people are trying to say. I don't want to put words in people's mouths, but when people use language like systemic, I think this is what they're trying to say, is that the history bleeds out through the DNA somehow. And it doesn't mean that, like you said, it's overt. It just plays out. So can you tell me how it plays out?
Oh, that's a messy question.
I wouldn't ask it if it was clean.
Part of it is, I'm an interdisciplinary guy who's doing theology that intersects with social science and, North American history. And I'm not a public policy person. I'm not a sociologist. So I use the word residual to say there's residual effects. Putting my finger exactly on where that is or how that is when you're dealing with social phenomenon is a difficult thing. So a lot of people today in the conversation about the concept of systemic justice, they'll point out and say, well, there's no such thing as systemic injustice because there's no jurisprudence anymore. We don't have, Jim
the
Crow
laws have
laws,
changed,
for example. Therefore, it's gone. And in a legal sense, I would agree. Like, yeah, I don't see Jim Crow jurisprudence anymore. However, I think we're talking past one another at that point, because people who are talking about systemic injustice aren't talking about it in jurisprudential terms, and they're looking at it more in terms of social terms. So in terms of, and I love Biola, so anyone listening to this, I pray my kids will go there, and I love the institution. Not picking on Biola here. I'm forever indebted to them. And hey, that's where we became friends. So that's where it all began, the Bucknam Jones posse. So, but if you Googled, like right now, Biola racism or whatever, you're going to get hits. You're going to see last year, the president of the institution, Barry Corey, was issued a letter on racial injustice. You will hit blogs about, students that are mad about this or that, and white parents who are mad that their kids were in a class where a professor brought up systemic injustice, and they think that that's reverse racism, and and I'm friends with professors there, and they share about things they're facing, and and they're trying to navigate this space, because hey, a lot of the people talking about social justice are typically coming from liberal traditions, and they have theological baggage, and so there's people who are concerned about it. There's a professor there now who's written a book on it. And, so they're still, as an institution, talking about it. So that shows, in my mind, if you're saying, well, if someone says it's not an issue anymore, then I'd say, well, why are they talking about it then? Why is it in the interwebs? Why are they, it's still an issue. They're still talking about it.
So Matt, what does you're a pastor. You said that you're not a sociologist or an expert in policy, but you are a pastor and a theologian. So as a pastor, how are you leading your church to try to bridge some of the racial gaps and to deal with some of the racial histories? And are there things specifically that you do in Los Angeles where you are that you would do? Wouldn't you understand what I mean? Like, is your church attempting to try to make a difference in this sphere?
Yes. Yes. A lot of it is organic because I'm an LA guy. So like a lot of what is happening in our church in terms of like people of different ethnic groups coming together in our church to worship God, a lot of that I think has just happened organically because of my upbringing. So, I live in a city that is less than 5% white. Now, gentrification is drastically going to change that, but when you look at my friends or my community or the people I'm trying to reach, a lot of them are people of color. And then I pastor a church in a section of the town that was once segregated, was formed by white flight. And, so a lot of the section of the town where I am they're white. And so white folks looking for a church in their neighborhood who moved to California for the California dream or whatever, end up going there.
But you don't live there.
But I don't live there. I couldn't afford to live there. I don't live there. And we draw people from all around the city. So a lot of it just happens because where we are, there's a lot of people who think, I don't know, every church should be multicultural or multi-ethnic. Well, you can't do that everywhere, but we're in Los Angeles. So if you go into a restaurant on the west side, it's integrated. You go into a Starbucks, it's integrated. You go to schools, they're integrated. But churches are still, in the famous words of Martin Luther King Jr., experiencing the most segregated hour in our culture on Sunday morning. They're still, these segregated hubs that haven't brought over. But in our case, our church is organically made of LA people. So there's lots of interracial marriages. There's lots of, my own family, there's 20,000 orphans in Los Angeles County. So we live the adoption life and the fostering life.
How many kids do you have, Matt?
We have 7 kids, and 3 of them are adopted. And so
different races too. You got some kids from Asian backgrounds and some African American backgrounds.
Yeah, Hispanic, African American, and Asian. So, my family is the LA story. So, my kids invite their friends to church. I invite my friends to church. We end up doing it because we're living life in LA. But what becomes pastorally important is to educate people on the history. So like Los Angeles, a lot of people think like, oh, we're LA, like we're progressive, and I don't mean that in the negative theological sense, but we're progressive, like we didn't have a Jim Crow. Well, then you got to educate people and teach them like, no, actually we had a very significant Jim Crow, perhaps worse than the South even. The 70-mile coastline of LA County was for whites only. Our beaches were segregated. You can read Victor Hugo Green's The Negro Motorist Green Book, and you can go back in history and see the places of LA that were safe and the places that weren't. There are 2 black beaches in LA County that even right now they're fighting for reparation and historic monuments around Bruce's Beach and Manhattan Beach. There's another one, the Inkwell in Santa Monica. So like showing people like, look, this was a little piece of the beach that white people let black people go to. Like the rest of it was segregated. Hey, this area over here, they used to have sundown town signs, like no blacks after night. Hey, California, by the way, the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution that gave rights to protect black people in 1868, the 14th Amendment in California was ratified in 1959.
Whoa.
So like the 15th Amendment, which granted voting rights to black people in 1870, the 15th Amendment was initially rejected by California, and it wasn't ratified until 1962.
And this is California we're talking about. I mean, that's the challenge. Yeah, that's the challenge that we're talking about because, the other, it's considered.
Inglewood, where I'm at, like Inglewood, the notorious Inglewood Inglewood had a KKK chapter in it up until the 50s. Inglewood's first black police officer was hired in 1969. So there you start talking about residual effects. Like before going into ministry, I worked for the Inglewood Police Department, and
right. So that's one of the pieces of your story that's really interesting is that you actually went the opposite way from your dad. That he went from pastor to cop. You went from cop to pastor.
Yeah. So, and I swore to myself I'd never become a pastor, and I ended up, working for Inglewood. My dad worked for Inglewood School Police, so he was pretty connected to a lot of folks, and I respected my dad. My dad cared about the neighborhood and wanted to give back, and was working in the Inglewood Unified School District in the high schools. They have, armed post-certified police working for the city. And so I grew up with a dad as a cop, and I kind of respected him for that. And then I ended up throwing my hat in the game to try and get hired. And early in my 20s, I got in and joined as a cadet and started working in patrol and thought, this is what I'm going to do. I love this. I'm able to help my community, blah, blah, blah. This was short-lived. I lasted about 1.5 years in it. It was particularly difficult because I'm from Inglewood, so my friends are getting DUIs, and I'm put in situations where I'm like, now I'm persona non grata. Matt, what are you doing? There is this tension in the inner city between police. That is a reality. I grew up in the city. I've been beaten up by police. I've run from the police, but it was a paying gig, and I got in, and I was excited about it. And long story short, I was sitting on a dead body at the iconic Randy's Donuts. If you've watched any cinema around Southern California, you've seen the iconic Randy's Donuts. There was a carjacking of a youth, and I was like the first responder who got there. This glass everywhere, dead body on the ground, and we were trying to figure out what happened. Decapitated. He was shot through the head. His head was essentially gone, and there's just glass everywhere. And through eyewitness testimony and cameras and stuff, we pieced together that he was sitting in his car, and some dudes rolled up on him, shot him through the glass, ripped his dead body out, took his car, and jumped right on the freeway. The coroner was backed up that night, and since I was a cadet, I was a boot, I sat there to write the dead body report and waited for hours, literally watching his blood coagulate on the ground. And I thought to myself, because at this point I was active in church, I was trying to take Bible classes and be a Bible major in college, and I thought this is pointless. I can't help people in this uniform because the people I want to reach. I mean, when I was running around and rebelling against God, police officers were the last people I would try and listen to, And this kid in particular on that night, he's dead. He's gone. I can't tell him about the Lord. And if I had met him hours earlier and tried to tell him about the Lord, my uniform alone, would have presented an obstacle for him. Granted, I am fully reformed, and there are no obstacles besides our regenerate hearts. But in any case, I sat that night and I told myself, I want to do this ministry thing. And I was really just wrestling with it because I was a kid of a failed pastor, and I thought, I don't want to be that guy. I had so many scars from church and hypocrisy and parents and this and that. I didn't want to do that. And I've got this great job that's paying well. And anyway, sitting on that dead body, the Lord really worked, and I had a sense of calling that night, that I was already having a feeling of calling that was leading me to take Bible classes and wanting to learn more about the Bible. I want to read it in Greek. I want to read it in Hebrew. I was hungry for the word, but that night it turned really into a call. And I told my sergeant, like, I'm giving my 2 months notice, and everyone was really disappointed in me because I was a young hire, and they spent a lot of time training and whatever, and I felt really conflicted about it. But I left, and then I went full-time into Bible college, and I got a job working at the church that I'm at now, running youth ministry. And I've never looked back, and I'm thankful for the journey in that. But but the dynamic now that we are in, Dante Wright this year, right? This post George Floyd ministry moment, we're just constantly seeing conversations around Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, Freddie Gray, Alton Sterling, Philandro Castile, Stephen Clark.
Matt, you had a friend just recently who this is a real issue for you. You have a friend who is faced the cops and died from it.
Yeah, I last year, 2020, my phone starts blowing up. Turn on the news. Friends are calling my phone. Turn on the news, and we're watching our friend die on TV. A childhood friend of mine. In fact, I have a little bracelet from his funeral service right here, hanging next to my desk. He, African American guy, grew up in LA. We've been friends since we were kids. Super close. He's like a brother to me. And he was dealing with some slight mental health issues, and he would go homeless and sort of leave the house, and he'd always come back. He would get to a place where life was going well. He was working hard. He was married, had some kids, and he wouldn't want to take his medication because he'd feel like everything's going fine, and he'd stop, and then slowly things start to unravel when you do that, and he would get paranoid. And so he would go homeless and kind of feel safe homeless. And he would do that. He'd walk down to my church even and see me down there, and I pray for him. And, his mom's really near and dear to me. I'm like, your mom loves you. Your sister loves you. We love you. What can we do? And, and then usually he'd come back around and start taking his meds and get a new job and get back on his feet, kind of a thing. Well, this time it wasn't the case. He went homeless and walked from Los Angeles to Orange County, and was just doing a homeless stint in Orange County for a couple of weeks. And we were all praying for him. His mom let us know, like, he left the house, he hasn't come back, whatever. We're praying for him. And then we turn on our TVs and we're watching our friend get killed on TV. He was walking the streets of Orange County, black man. 2 white police officers approach him for the alleged crime of jaywalking.
Well, and there's a debate too about whether he was or wasn't, because they were in their car themselves debating it, right?
There's new camera footage that surfaced of the 2 of them. One of the officers saying, "Hey, let's pull him over, and what's the probable cause and whatever." And he's jaywalking. No, he's not really. And if you really want to geek out on penal codes and vehicle codes in California and what constitutes jaywalking, we could waste a lot of time on that, but I would contend he wasn't doing anything.
Regardless,
he wasn't doing anything. And even if he was, even if he was running across the street in the middle of traffic, I think the way the altercation went down was avoidable, and watch, it's one thing to watch George Floyd die on camera, as we all did, those infamous 9 minutes, and then to see people process, well, was his knee on the back, was it on the neck, was it the drugs in his system, was it this, was it that, and people want to debate like they're coroners over the cause of death and whatever. That's one thing. When it's someone you know and love and are as close to you as Kurt is to me, man, it's so hard to read scriptures at his funeral. So hard. I think we're all still having our own kind of trauma over it and still processing it. I had a funeral this week at Inglewood Cemetery. That's where he's buried, and kind of fresh on my mind. Like I hadn't gone down to see where his body was laid to rest for a few months, and so just this week, actually, it was on Wednesday. I was there, being reminded of it afresh. So yeah, like when you live in this, it's not theoretical. This isn't just okay, Breonna Taylor, she was asleep, some officers started shooting, she got shot. What do we think about that? Like this, I love him, and his family, and his mom, and his sister, and his brother-in-law, and his kids, and so it's rough. And to see people disconnected from it, particularly in churches, that this has become like something that pastors are supposed to integrate into their churches, and it's just crazy. So in terms of your question that you asked about like how we do multicultural or ethnic church, it's cultivating a kind of environment where the polarized voices of the culture, polarized and let me add, monetized, because the right is being monetized to make the right hate the left, and the left is being monetized to make the left angry at the right. So they're making money off of this stuff, and people in our congregations are being discipled by Fox and CNN, and they are coming into our congregations on a Sunday morning, and pastorally how we lead them in that. And, and so I can get in front of my congregation and say, regardless of what you think about, this death or whatever, let me tell you about this man who I knew and loved. Let me tell you about his family. Let me tell you about his kids, and really get people back to the place of the humanity of it all. Like George Floyd is made in the image of God. Stop deliberating, especially for people who have no experience in law enforcement, use of force. They're not trained coroners by any stretch of the imagination. They haven't lived any of this stuff. Just stop and just mourn with those who are mourning, and let's join together and seeking the Lord for his hand to move in our place. So I think a lot of that is just happening organically because we're LA people. Yeah. And as I hear pastors outside of this context, I just think it's going to be rougher for them because it's really just all theoretical. They're just a monolithic culture watching the news.
So Matt, you know what? One of the key reasons I wanted to talk to you is, number one, you are one of the most interesting people in the world. As people can tell by your conversations, sharp guy and has all sorts of great background, and I would love to talk to you forever. But secondly, I also just wanted people to hear that there are really smart people who are thinking very deeply about issues regarding race and how the church responds and all that, and that we should be open-minded and open-hearted toward our brothers and sisters of different races within our faith who have a different story, and be willing to hear them. And it is time that the church can step into these moments and bring some kind of unity where the rest of the world is trying to breed disunity. And so anyway, brother, I'm so thankful that you've had a chance to talk to me. I could talk to you forever. Hey, if anybody has anything they want to learn about regarding some of the stuff you talked about, do you have any recommendations of a book that you would recommend for people to read about, from a Christian point of view, from a racial dynamics, or something that you would recommend for, I don't know, maybe in history of Los Angeles? Fascinating history, by the way. I mean, yeah.
Before the resource question, on the note of the sharing of stories, like you said, I think it's also important to qualify it with, we are not, postmodernists just running around telling stories, and at the end of the day, there is no objective reality in it. So we story tell, we listen to one another, and there are objective realities. There are objective realities with regard to what justice is, with regard to social dimensions, with regard to racism, with regard to use of police force, et cetera, et cetera. So, like, I think it's important to listen, but it's also important to, like, lest we be misunderstood here. I'm saying this because often in these conversations where that's brought up, you have people operating from paradigms. We are committed, objectivist evangelicals who believe in inerrant, inspired word and objective reality. On that note, transitioning to resources, that's kind of what makes it hard, is because the people who typically are a little more sensitive, empathetic, or know the stories are typically operating from different traditions than us. Now, there are those within an evangelical tradition, in particular a Reformed one, who are operating in their writing stuff, but they've been marginalized and they've been mischaracterized. And, they say, hey, this was, racism is real or whatever. And all of a sudden, that's cultural Marxism. That's Frankfurt School, and you ask them, like, have you read the primary sources on any of this? And they have no idea, but they watched a YouTube video and they know everything about it. So I hesitate to recommend resources because the resources that I think actually get a lot of the history and stuff are typically more left. They're kind of more left of leaning, and then the ones that aren't, they're just getting marginalized. So if I recommended something, then people listening to this would just write me off as...
You need to write something then, Matt.
So that's what, hopefully, I've submitted my thesis. I'm in
the
editing.
Title for the popular book. Can I just recommend a different title for the popular book?
Yeah. I think it could really work into, because I have chapters on, like, white evangelical racism. Like, it could probably break down into some different stuff. And there are great books. Maybe we could post some links or something like that.
That sounds good.
If we're interested, rather than verbally saying it, because I just hesitate because I'm a pastor and I want to, like, bring people. And I think if I start naming names of books,
right, you get into the tribalism.
I get into that tribalism, and they go, "See, I knew you were that."
Right.
I knew you were that guy.
So can I just thank you, my liberal progressive friend Matt, for being part of this conversation? Oh, are you getting offended about that? Is that the line? That's
you're
it?
triggering me.
God bless you, brother. God bless you so much. Thanks so much. Hey, it's great to talk to all you guys. I'll get you next time. Thanks for listening to Conversations with Jeff. Make sure you subscribe to catch up on all upcoming episodes. So until next time, love God, do what you want, and don't be stupid.